What if the absolute ultimate life hack, for superhuman focus, endless energy, and just literal undeniable magnetism had absolutely nothing to do with what you consume?
Right.
And what if it had everything to do with what you strictly, almost obsessively refuse to give away? Like, what if the secret to supremacy wasn't found in a pill or a new diet or a workout routine, but in never having sex again?
I mean, it completely upends the modern paradigm, doesn't it? Because we operate on this philosophy of constant intake.
Exactly. We live in a world that tells us energy is just, well, it's something you drink from an aluminum can, right?
Right.
Or you buy it in the supplement aisle.
Yeah. If you're tired, you consume something. If you want pleasure, you consume something.
It's just a total conveyor belt of input and output. But today, we're stepping into a worldview that flips that entire script completely upside down.
Yeah.
So welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we are exploring a framework where extreme physical and mental asceticism is presented not as some kind of miserable punishment, but as the ultimate biological and spiritual cheat code.
It really is. And our source material for this exploration is a truly fascinating, um, a highly detailed, and honestly incredibly intense document. It's titled The Secret of Eternal Youth.
Yeah, it's a bold title.
Very bold. And this text is derived from the spiritual discourses of Parampudya Sant Sri Asaramji Bapu. It presents a paradigm deeply rooted in traditional Indian asceticism, specifically focusing on the rigorous practice of strict celibacy.
Right, which is known as brahmacharya.
Exactly, brahmacharya.
So the mission for our deep dive today is to really get inside this framework. We want to understand the internal logic of a system that believes preserving one highly specific, highly controversial biological resource is the actual key to unlocking superhuman potential.
But before we get into the biological math, the historical takedowns and the mind-bending daily rules of this lifestyle, and there are a lot of rules we have to set the stage.
Yeah, we definitely need a disclaimer here.
Absolutely. Establishing the correct framing here is crucial for you, the listener. The source material we're unpacking today contains highly specific, socially and politically charged claims.
Very intense claims.
Right. It makes uncompromising statements about Western medicine, psychology, gender dynamics, and just the fundamental mechanics of human biology. So it's essential to make it explicitly clear right at the top that we, as your guides, are not endorsing these viewpoints.
Right, we are definitely not presenting these claims as objective scientific facts, and we are certainly not prescribing this as medical advice.
No, not at all. Our job is to impartially report the author's worldview. We're doing this to help you understand the profound philosophical divide that exists between the modern Western ethos of indulgence, which, let's face it, we all swim in daily, and the traditional Indian asceticism presented in this text.
Yeah, we're analyzing this document as a cultural and philosophical artifact. We want to understand how the author arrives at these extreme conclusions and what it physically and mentally demands of the people who actually follow this path.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because where the text actually starts isn't with some moral lecture, which is what you might expect. It starts with a deeply complex biological claim. It completely redefines how the human body supposedly manufactures its most precious resource.
Right, so let's talk about the economy of vital energy.
Yes.
The author grounds the entire philosophy in the ancient system of Ayurveda, specifically focusing on the physiological process of digestion. But, and this is key, we have to completely discard the way a modern nutritionist describes digestion.
Right, because modern science looks at breaking down macronutrients into calories for immediate fuel. Like, I eat an apple, I get a quick burst of energy.
Exactly. But the Ayurvedic framework presented here describes a sequential, highly refined transmutation of matter over a massive timescale.
Yeah, it outlines this incredibly laborious 30-day, 4-hour cycle.
It's very specific.
It's very specific. When you eat a meal, the food doesn't just instantly become usable energy. According to the text, it goes through a multi-stage refinement process.
Yeah.
It's kind of like crude oil being slowly distilled into rocket fuel. So it starts with food turning into something called chyle.
Right, chyle.
Bro.
And it's described in the text as this milky bodily fluid. The text notes that the conversion of this dhatu, or biological element, at every single sequential step takes a period of exactly 5 days.
Wait, so I eat a piece of bread, and it takes 5 whole days just to become this chyle.
According to the source, yes.
No.
And that is merely step 1.
Wow.
From that chyle, over the next 5 days, the body extracts blood.
Yep.
So now we're at day 10.
Okay.
Out of the blood, over the next 5 days, comes flesh. Day 15. Out of the flesh, over 5 more days, comes fat. Day 20, out of the fat comes bone. Day 25.
It just keeps going.
It does. Out of the bone comes marrow. Day 30. And finally, extracted from that marrow, the body produces semen.
The biological marathon required here is just astonishing to think about. I mean, 30 days. And the conversion rate they provide to go along with this timeline is staggering. I was trying to visualize the math on this while I was reading the source material.
The numbers are pretty wild.
They are. The text claims that it takes 32 kilograms of raw food to produce 800 grams of blood.
Right.
And from that 800 grams of blood, after this entire 30-day process, the body is only able to yield 20 grams of semen.
Yeah, to put that into perspective for you, 32 kilograms of food is roughly the weight of a fully grown golden retriever.
Oh my God.
Or, a massive sack of grain. It is a tremendous amount of intake, and the final yield, those 20 grams, is barely a spoonful, so it's a system of extreme biological scarcity.
It really makes me think about how we treat our energy today. It's like treating your bodily energy like an ultra-exclusive trust fund rather than a daily checking account.
That's a great analogy.
Because we live in a world where we think, oh, I had a big lunch, I drank a double espresso, I have plenty of energy to burn at the gym or to go out tonight. But this text is looking at you and saying, no, that energy you're casually throwing away took an entire month and 32 kilos of raw material to synthesize.
And importantly, the text argues that this final product doesn't just sit in one place, like in the reproductive organs. It exists in a subtle state permeating all the cells of the body.
Oh, interesting.
The author uses a very evocative analogy here. They compare it to butter hidden within milk.
Okay, break that down.
So before you churn the milk, the butter is invisible, right? But its presence is what gives the milk its richness and thickness. Once the butter is forcefully extracted and removed, the remaining buttermilk is thinned out. It completely loses its essence.
Ah, I see.
So in this worldview, the more this vital energy is expelled and wasted, the more the entire biological organism deteriorates, weakens, and ages.
So here's my immediate pushback, or the question that jumped out at me right away when reading this. If the body works so incredibly hard over 30 days to create this tiny, precious amount of energy, how does the text view the everyday person? Someone who just lives a normal modern life. The person who gets married, has a regular sex life, watches Netflix, and doesn't think twice about any of this.
Well, the text views that ordinary modern approach as a profound, almost heartbreaking tragedy of ignorance.
Really?
Heartbreaking.
Yes, the author doesn't just disagree with it. They see it as a catastrophic waste of human potential. To illustrate exactly how they view the average person, the author uses a very specific, deeply memorable metaphor. It's the story of the foolish gardener.
Oh, man. This story is wild. Please explain the gardener to the listeners.
It perfectly encapsulates their perspective. So the text describes a gardener who spends all his time, all his physical energy, and all his accumulated wealth cultivating a vast, beautiful floral garden.
Just pouring his life into it. Right. He meticulously tends the soil, he waters the plants, and he grows a stunning variety of multicolored flowers over a very long period of time. Then, after all this exhaustive labor, he gathers all these flowers. He goes through a complex distillation process to extract a tiny, minuscule vial of wonderful, incredibly rare perfume.
The ultimate harvest of all his hard work.
Precisely. And what does he do next with this priceless vial? He walks over to the edge of his property and pours the perfume directly into an open sewer.
Ugh, such a visceral, almost painful image. You can just picture the waste.
And the text makes the connection explicitly clear. Most of us, according to the author, are exactly like this foolish gardener. The vital energy accumulated over a period of 30 to 40 days, energy that required massive biological effort to refine, is just casually dissipated for a fleeting moment of sexual gratification.
But I'm stuck on this perfume in the sewer idea. Because if I waste energy, I feel tired, sure. But I eat a sandwich, I take a nap, and I bounce back. But the text seems to imply I'm losing something much, much bigger than just calories. If the perfume isn't supposed to go in the sewer, where is it supposed to go? What exactly is evaporating here? Let's talk about the concept of oshos, because this seems to be the real currency the text cares about.
That is the crucial pivot here. It is not just that you're saving up physical material in some bodily vault. It's that this material, when strictly preserved, goes through a further internal alchemy.
Alchemy.
Yes. The text states that when sexual energy is preserved and guarded by pure thoughts, it undergoes a process of sublimation and is transmuted into oshas.
And what exactly is oshas in this framework?
Oshas is supreme spiritual energy. The text literally calls it the direct cause of magnetic personality.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you have ever met someone who just possesses an undeniable charismatic aura, someone with lustrous eyes, a commanding voice, or an awe-inspiring, unshakable presence, the text argues that this is not just good genetics, and it's not just self-confidence.
What is it then?
It is literal, biologically synthesized, stored up ojas radiating from their brain.
So dumping the perfume in the sewer isn't just bad for your immune system. You are literally flushing away your charisma.
Exactly.
You're flushing your willpower, your intellect, and your spiritual potential. And the math the text provides for this loss is just brutal. It says that the energy wasted in a single act of sexual intercourse is tantamount to the energy spent in hard physical labor for 10 straight days.
Or intense mental work for 3 days.
Right. It's a massive energetic bankruptcy.
It is. And this mechanism explains why celibacy is paramount within the author's framework. It creates a direct, unbreakable link between physical retention and spiritual salvation.
It makes sense within their logic.
Exactly. The text leans heavily on ancient scriptures to validate this high-stakes economy. It quotes Lord Shiva, who is arguably the most powerful ascetic in the Hindu pantheon, saying that preserving this energy is the supreme penance.
Wow.
And it claims that an ascetic who truly masters this biological retention is not a human being, but God.
That is a massive, massive elevation.
It also quotes ancient Jain scriptures, which categorically call lust the absolute worst of myriad vices. The underlying belief is that if you are constantly draining this vital resource to chase fleeting pleasure, your mind inevitably becomes sluggish, your willpower dies, and any hope of true self-realization or spiritual liberation remains a distant, impossible dream.
Basically, you are physically bankrupting your soul.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Well, if preserving this energy is the absolute ultimate good in this philosophy, then it naturally stands to reason that any force, any person, or any ideology encouraging people to waste that energy must be viewed as the ultimate evil.
Naturally.
Which leads us directly into one of the most intense, fiery, and honestly controversial sections of the entire text. I'm talking about the aggressive, uncompromising takedown of Western psychology, and specifically its founding father, Sigmund Freud.
The clash between East and West in this text is incredibly stark. The author places the blame for modern societal degradation squarely at the feet of Freudian psychoanalysis.
They don't pull any punches.
No, they don't. The text mounts a fierce, almost personal crusade against Freud, describing him in highly charged, condemnatory terms. Freud is explicitly labeled as abnormal, as a psychotic, and as someone entirely driven by Oedipal lust.
The character assassination here is intense. Like, the text claims Freud was a heavy cocaine addict, that he suffered from debilitating travel phobias, irrational death fears, and deeply repressed homicidal drives.
It's a laundry list of accusations.
It really is. There is even this bizarre, highly specific anecdote included, where the text claims that as a youth, Freud exhibited extreme abnormal behavior, such as deliberately walking into his parents' bedroom at age 7 and intentionally urinating on the floor.
Right. And the author is wielding these historical characterizations, regardless of their clinical accuracy or historical context, mind you, as a hammer, to completely delegitimize Freud's foundational theories.
Because Freud is the guy who basically said, hey, let it out.
Exactly. The crux of the issue is this. Freud posited that suppressing natural sexual desires causes deep neurosis, psychological maldevelopment, and hysteria. The text argues the exact opposite.
Right.
It claims that Freud, because of his own alleged severe abnormalities and moral failings, projected his personal sickness onto all of humanity.
Yeah, the text actually quotes a child psychiatrist who supposedly stated that Freud suffered the grand delusion that his own specific abnormality was universal to the human condition.
Which is a heavy accusation.
Very. And the author blames this resulting free sex ideology spawned by Freud's theories for the literal, measurable collapse of society. They particularly point the finger at the United States. And they throw out some very heavy, terrifying statistics to try and prove this point.
Yes. The author attempts to quantify the societal damage. They cite statistics claiming that a staggering 80% of adults in a New York metropolis study showed active symptoms of mental illness.
80%.
Right. And they point to a 65% divorce rate, a burglary occurring every 10 seconds, millions of premarital pregnancies, and the devastating spread of the AIDS epidemic.
The thesis is basically, look at what your Western science bought you.
Precisely. The text argues that because Americans followed Freudian psychology and believed they had to instantly satisfy every arising desire to remain healthy, their society is now riddled with chaos, terror, insecurity, and arrogance.
And this is despite them possessing 40% of the world's material wealth. The author basically views America as a wealthy, technologically advanced sewer of wasted ohas.
That's exactly how they frame it.
It's a sweeping, unapologetic indictment. And I want to pause here and clarify again for you listening. We are exploring the author's deeply held, intense characterizations here. We aren't sitting down to do an objective medical history of Freud's childhood, nor are we doing a sociological audit of 1990s America.
Right, that's not the goal today.
But to really understand the philosophical core of this text, we have to look closely at what the author offers as the superior alternative to Freud. Because if Freud says, don't suppress or you'll go crazy, what does the Indian psychology in the text actually say to do with all this desire?
That brings us to the most vital psychological distinction the text draws, the fundamental difference between suppression and sublimation. It is crucial to understand that the author actually agrees with Freud on one minor point. They agree that mere suppression or repression of sexual desire is harmful.
Wait, really? The text agrees that holding it in is bad?
It agrees that forcefully holding it in is bad.
Oh, okay.
The text explicitly states that if you just forcefully repress a desire, like if you just grit your teeth, clench your jaw, and try to bury it in your subconscious, the desire doesn't die. It will attack you again with greater ferocity and produce severe irritability, restlessness, and mental illness.
Okay, so they aren't just saying ignore it and it goes away.
Not at all. Indian psychology, according to the text, specifically citing ancient systems like Patanjali's yoga, teaches the science of sublimation.
Sublimation.
Right. This is not passive hiding. This is a positive, dynamic, highly active conversion process. The text uses a brilliant physics metaphor. It compares it to converting raw heat into light or electricity. Through dedicated meditation, chanting, physical postures, and strictly pure thoughts, the raw, gross material energy of lust is actively transmuted into the refined spiritual energy of ojas.
So suppression is like trying to trap a fire in a wooden box, which will obviously just burn the box down. But sublimation is like building a steam engine over the fire to power a locomotive.
That is an excellent analogy.
Thanks.
And the text argues that Freud, crippled by his own biases, only ever studied the wooden box of suppression. He was completely blind to the steam engine of sublimation.
Okay, I love that analogy, but let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
If the author believes Western psychology is literally destroying society by telling people to give in to their urges, how do they explain the very common, very modern concept of just living a natural life? Because the pushback you hear all the time is, hey, I'm not a psychoanalytic case study. I'm just an animal doing what comes naturally. When my body is hungry, I eat food. When my body is tired, I go to sleep. When I have a sexual urge, I act on it. It's just biology. How does the text respond to that seemingly airtight logical defense?
The text has a deeply rigorous, almost condescending rebuttal to the natural life argument. It essentially argues that ordinary people who hide behind the natural life excuse are merely rationalizing their absolute slavery to base passions.
Ouch.
Yeah. The author actually quotes the revered Saint Kabir, who famously said, "Supreme is the natural state of samadhi," which is a state of deep meditative consciousness. But the text rigorously clarifies that this truly natural life, the state of acting entirely freely without accumulating karma or sin, is only safely possible for a jivan mukta.
Okay, we need to define that. What is a jivan mukta?
A jivan mukta is an enlightened soul. But to truly grasp this, you have to think of a jivan mukta not just as someone who is peaceful, but as a psychological fortress.
A fortress.
Yes. This is a being who, through decades of extreme asceticism, has completely surgically eradicated all internal cravings. They are fundamentally unaffected by external praise or devastating insult. They are entirely detached from their ego, their social status, and even their physical body.
So if you insult them, their heart rate doesn't even spike.
Exactly. If they are offered a lavish royal feast, they can eat it with joy, or they can throw it in the dirt, all with the exact same perfect, unbothered equanimity. For a being of that magnitude, living a natural life is pure, unadulterated bliss because their nature is already perfectly purified.
So they can do whatever they want because what they want is fundamentally uncorrupted.
Precisely. But for an ordinary person, someone whose mental poise is completely ruined if someone cuts them off in traffic, someone who is dominated by concepts of I-ness and minus, someone who constantly desires more money or validation, for that person to claim they're living a natural life while indulging their physical senses is the ultimate self-deception.
They're kidding themselves.
According to the text, yes. It argues they aren't living naturally, they are just yielding to base animal instincts and calling it freedom.
But wait. If this modern philosophy of just live naturally is a dangerous lie, according to this text, how does the author explain the catastrophic failures of people who actually tried to live that way?
Yeah.
Because, to really hammer home the disastrous consequences of becoming a slave to passion, the text doesn't just rely on abstract philosophical arguments or statistics about 1990s America.
No, it gets very specific.
It leans incredibly heavily into ancient mythology and historical cautionary tales.
Yes. The text utilizes these historical and mythological figures to create a stark, uncompromising binary. Those who strictly preserved their biological energy achieved literal superhuman feats, and those who foolishly wasted it met inevitable, deeply tragic ends.
Let's start with the successes.
On the side of preservation, the text points to grandsire Bhishma from the great epic, the Mahabharata. He was a warrior who took a lifelong vow of celibacy, and his accumulated power was so immense that even the god of death could not take his life while he lay mortally wounded on a bed of arrows, waiting for the auspicious time to pass away.
We also have Hanuman, right, the monkey deity, who possessed the power to leap across entire oceans and carry mountains in his hands, and Lakshmana from the Ramayana, who famously survived a brutal 14-year exile in the demon-filled forest without allowing a single impure thought to enter his mind.
Exactly.
But honestly, the cautionary tales are where the text really flexes its rhetorical muscles to try and scare the reader straight. Let's talk about the historical examples they use, because they bring in figures you wouldn't expect, like Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yes, the text brings European history into its Ayurvedic framework. It claims that Napoleon, a man famous for his unyielding motto that impossible is a word found only in the dictionary of fools, was ultimately defeated at the Battle of Waterloo, specifically because of his sexual indiscretions.
Wait, Napoleon lost because he had sex?
According to this text, yes. It argues that he engaged in carnal pleasure the evening before the decisive battle. It claims he spilt his white blood and was thrown into the well of carnal pleasure, a biological depletion which directly cost him his supreme military genius and clarity of thought at the crucial moment.
It's essentially arguing that Waterloo wasn't lost because of tactics or the weather, but because of a lack of ohas.
That's the claim.
And they make a very similar claim about Prithviraj Chauhan, a legendary Indian king. He supposedly defeated his bitter enemy 16 times in battle, but in the 17th battle he was captured and brutally blinded. Why? Because, according to the text, he had become infatuated and distracted by his beautiful new empress, Sanyukta. His vital energy was depleted, and thus his invincibility was shattered.
The text even points to Abhimanyu, the brilliant, tragically young warrior in the Mahabharata. He fought valiantly against impossible odds, but was ultimately killed in the Chakravyuha formation because he had spent the night before the battle with his wife, thus losing the protective, energetic aura required to survive such an extreme trial.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text uses these stories to argue that indulgence makes you weak. But it also has stories to prove that indulgence is a trap, that you can never actually satisfy the desire, no matter how much you try. And to prove this, they share an incredible, slightly bizarre dialogue between the great Greek philosopher Socrates and his student.
It is a fascinating inclusion. Socrates is used here as a mouthpiece for extreme ascetic wisdom.
Right, so let's paint the scene. The student comes to Socrates and asks a very practical question. He says, "Master, how many times can a householder, a married man, have copulation with his legal wife?" And Socrates, deadpan, answers, "Only once in his lifetime."
Which, even by ascetic standards, is an extreme baseline.
Totally. And the student is shocked. He says, "Master, that's impossible for worldly men. Give me an easier path." So Socrates negotiates down. He says, "All right, once a year." The student says that's still way too hard. Socrates drops it to once a month.
Still negotiating.
Exactly. The student throws his hands up and says, "This also is impossible. They cannot remain for a single day without sexual intercourse." And this is the absolute punchline. Socrates looks at him and replies, "Do one thing now. Dig a grave and purchase a coffin and winding sheet for the corpse beforehand. Now you can spoil yourself any number of times you like."
It is a morbid, highly effective rhetorical device. Socrates is essentially telling the student that yielding to daily ferocial desire is not living. It is a slow, deliberate biological suicide. You are just digging your own grave with every act.
Right.
And the text notes that the student is so terrified by this stark reality that he instantly takes a vow of strict, unbroken celibacy for the rest of his life.
But if the Socrates story is about the literal physical death caused by indulgence, the Epic of King Yayati, which is another major myth the text uses, is entirely about the psychological torture of it.
Yes, the Yayati story is crucial.
Yayati is an ancient king who enjoys all the royal pleasures imaginable, but he is cursed with premature old age. But Yayati isn't ready to stop partying. He wants to keep indulging, so he uses his power to literally borrow the youth of his youngest son, Puru.
It is a striking metaphor for the vampiric nature of unbridled lust. Yayati takes his son's vitality and proceeds to engage in sensual pleasures for a full 1,000 years.
1,000 years.
A millennium of uninterrupted, absolute royal indulgence. But the crucial part of the story comes at the end. After 1,000 years, he returns the youth to his son, not satisfied, but with a profound, crushing realization. He declares that desires never die. They are never, ever satiated by indulgence.
The text uses this incredible, vivid metaphor to explain Yayati's realization.
Yeah.
Desire is like a sacrificial fire, and indulgence is like pouring ghee, which is clarified butter, directly onto it. You might think pouring liquid on a fire will put it out, but you aren't putting the fire out at all. You are providing the exact fuel that makes it burn hotter, higher, and more aggressively.
It's the ultimate trap.
Yeah. Yayati realizes that even if he owned all the wealth, all the land, and all the women on earth, it would never be enough to quench the fire. The thirst for enjoyment is a fatal, incurable disease.
If we connect this to the bigger picture the author is trying to paint, the text uses these ancient myths to argue that the modern pursuit of endless sexual gratification is a thermodynamic trap. You simply cannot consume your way to peace.
You just burn out.
Right. The text firmly asserts that sex should strictly exclusively be for the purpose of progeny having children to continue the lineage. It argues that in this regard, even wild animals possess more inherent self-control than modern humans.
Because animals have mating seasons.
Exactly. Animals only mate during specific, biologically dictated seasons for the sole purpose of reproduction. The text argues that humans, ironically blinded and corrupted by their advanced intellect, indulge year-round for mere pleasure. And in doing so, they degenerate to a level of existence that is actually lower and less disciplined than beasts.
Man, that is harsh. So having thoroughly terrified the reader with tales of Napoleon losing at Waterloo, Socrates telling people to literally buy coffins, and kings realizing they are burning in a 1,000-year thermodynamic trap, the text doesn't just leave you hanging in despair. It smartly shifts gears.
Yes, it becomes highly prescriptive.
It offers a highly specific, granular, practical toolkit for survival and purity. We are talking about the daily, hour-by-hour mechanics of brahmacharya.
And this is where the text transitions from grand philosophical warnings to the extreme micromanagement of daily life. The author understands that grand ideals are useless without practical application, so they provide a hyper-detailed lifestyle guide designed to rigorously control every possible sensory variable that might stimulate the mind.
Let's get into the specifics.
This begins with simple living, strictly eschewing fashionable clothes, avoiding all perfumes, and rejecting soft, luxurious beds.
It also means avoiding all intoxicants, right? Alcohol, tobacco, drugs.
Yes, all intoxicants are absolutely forbidden, as they are said to violently weaken the immune system, agitate the mind, and make the seminal fluid watery and easily lost. But beyond just avoiding the bad, it prescribes very specific, almost bizarre physical regimens.
Like what?
For example, the text strongly advises sleeping on your left side to keep the right nostril open, which we will get to in a moment.
Oh, the nostril thing. Yeah, we'll definitely get to that.
It also mandates taking cold water baths for the genitals immediately after using the restroom. The biological logic here is that the cold water drastically soothes the local nerves, draws blood away from the region, and mechanically weakens any rising sexual desire.
That sounds intense. And the diet required to support this lifestyle is intensely strict, too. To maintain a pure mind, you must eat a pure diet, specifically what Ayurveda calls a sattvic diet.
Correct. The foundational rule of the sattvic diet in this context is avoiding absolutely anything that creates heat or artificial stimulation in the body. Naturally, this means no meat, no fish, and no eggs.
Standard vegetarian stuff.
But it goes much further than basic vegetarianism. You must strictly avoid garlic and onions, which are considered aphrodisiacs in this system. You must avoid excessively spicy foods, excessively sour foods, and even seemingly innocent things like hot tea.
Because heat equals passion.
Exactly. The text argues that these heat-generating foods directly stimulate the sexual organs, agitate the nervous system, and inevitably lead to catastrophic losses like nocturnal emissions. The regimen dictates that you must eat lightly, especially at night, and you must never ever drink warm milk right before bed, as it is highly stimulating.
Okay, the diet makes logical sense within their framework.
hmm
But the most surprising, incredibly specific detail to me, the one that really made me stop and reread the page, was what I'm calling the nostril rule.
Yes, the nostrils.
The text claims that you have to actively monitor which nostril you are breathing out of before you consume absolutely anything.
It is a remarkable level of physiological micromanagement. The text introduces the concepts of the surinadi, which corresponds to the flow of breath through the right nostril, and the chandra nadi, which corresponds to the left nostril.
And the rule is incredibly rigid. It says you must only ever eat solid food when the surinadi, the right nostril, is dominant. And you must only drink liquids, like water or juice, when the chandranadi, the left nostril, is open.
The mechanical precision demanded of the practitioner is astonishing. The text issues a severe warning, literally stating, "Beware, do not take any liquid when the right nostril is open."
Imagine you're listening to this deep dive on your morning commute right now. You're holding a travel mug of coffee or water. According to the nostril rule we just learned, if your right nostril happens to be slightly congested right now, or if the left one is closed, taking a sip of that drink is literally draining your vital life force.
It's a terrifying thought for them.
If you drink water when the right nostril is open, the text absolutely guarantees a loss of seminal energy. It's like you are constantly tasked with operating a complex, highly sensitive pneumatic pressure valve located inside your own face.
And if your nostrils aren't cooperating when it's mealtime, the text actually has a mechanical workaround.
Oh yeah, tell them about the pillow trick.
If your right nostril is closed when it's time to eat your solid food, the text instructs you to lie down on your left side or to forcefully press a small pillow into your left armpit.
Your armpit.
Yes, your left armpit. This mechanical pressure supposedly forces the right nostril to open so you can safely eat.
It is so intense. The text also prescribes very specific herbal remedies to assist in this massive biological undertaking. There is a specific mixture of amla powder, which are Indian gooseberries mixed with rock sugar, to be taken at night to thicken the semen and prevent loss. And it lavishly praises tulsi, or holy basil leaves, as a miraculous divine herb that helps conserve energy, purify the blood, and significantly improve memory.
This raises an important question about the deeper psychology behind this incredibly demanding regimen. Why is the text so obsessively prescriptive? Why dictate the armpits and the nostrils?
Yeah, why go to that extreme?
It is fundamentally about monopolizing the practitioner's attention. If you are constantly monitoring the airflow in your nostrils, analyzing the heat index of your food, and taking cold baths, your mind literally has no idle time to wander toward lust. It is a totalizing, inescapable system of physical discipline.
And that discipline obviously extends to exercise. But we aren't talking about going to the gym and lifting weights. In fact, the text explicitly warns against heavy muscular exercise or bodybuilding.
Right, it claims it diverts vital energy outward to gross muscle tissue instead of upward to the brain.
The preferred, almost exclusive physical exercise is yoga. And one pose is championed above all others, Padopashmattanasana.
Yes, the seated forward bend. The practitioner sits on the floor, legs extended straight, exhales, grasps their toes, and attempts to touch their forehead flat against their knees, holding the posture while retaining the breath out.
The text claims this specific pose wasn't just invented by a fitness guru. It was designed by Lord Shiva himself. And it posits that it acts as a panacea, curing an incredible, disparate array of ailments. It claims it cures wet dreams, severe indigestion, asthma, sciatica, jaundice, and even impotence. It is presented as a special divine boon for anyone attempting the arduous path of brahmacharya.
It's the ultimate multi-purpose tool.
So, hearing all of this, the utterly bland diet, the obsessive nostril checking, the cold water genital baths, the intense yoga poses, my immediate real-world pushback is, who has the time?
That's a fair question.
This sounds like a 247 full-time job. How does someone living in the modern world, someone who has a stressful commute, who is constantly bombarded by billboards, hypersexualized TV shows, targeted internet ads, and just the general grinding friction of society actually pull this off without completely abandoning their family and moving to an isolated cave in the Himalayas?
Well, the author completely anticipates this exact struggle. They are not ignorant of the modern landscape. The author recognizes that modern life is filled with unprecedented, highly engineered temptations, what the text specifically calls out as the dangers of multinational television serials and pornographic literature.
So what's their solution?
To counter this highly toxic environment, the text doesn't just offer dietary tips. It offers profound mental visualization techniques, emergency somatic overrides, and shares modern-day miracles to prove to the practitioner that divine supernatural assistance is available.
Let's talk about the emergency protocols first, because the text treats a sudden spike in lust exactly like a critical medical emergency that requires immediate, life-saving first aid.
They offer highly specific somatic bodily interventions to short-circuit the nervous system. One primary technique is called yoni mudra.
Walk us through it.
When sexual desire suddenly strikes, the text instructs the practitioner to immediately contract the genital and anal muscles inwards and upwards towards the belly, acting almost like pulling a physical piston. Simultaneously, they must focus their mind entirely, with laser precision, on the Sahasrara chakra, which is visualized as a 1,000-petaled lotus located at the crown of the brain.
The underlying logic being that biological energy inevitably flows wherever the mind is focused. So if you forcefully yank your attention to the absolute top of your head, the surging biological energy is supposedly rerouted away from the lower sex centers, pulled up the spine, and safely transmuted into ojas.
Exactly. Another fascinating, deeply mechanical physiological technique involves the manipulation of breath. When lust arises, the text instructs you to exhale completely, forcefully emptying the lungs, and to hold the breath out. While holding the breath out, you contract the belly back towards the spine.
Holding the breath out seems so counterintuitive, you know. Usually people say take a deep breath in.
It does seem strange, but the text explains the internal mechanics of this. The air stored in the lower abdomen and lungs is called apanavayu. By forcefully expiring this air and refusing to breathe in, the apanavayu is instantly weakened. And because it is weakened, it lacks the force to activate the sex center.
Wow.
You are essentially starving the internal biological machinery of the pneumatic pressure it requires to process the desire.
It's essentially a manual, forceful override of the autonomic nervous system. You are unplugging the machine.
That's a good way to look at it.
But beyond these physical life hacks, there is a profound psychological visualization technique required to survive in society. And to explain it, the text goes back to the ancient epic of the Mahabharata, to the fascinating story of Arjuna and the celestial dancer Urvashi.
This is a vital, foundational narrative for understanding the text's approach to how a male practitioner must interact with the opposite sex.
Tell the story.
Arjuna is a legendary, handsome warrior. Urvashi is a breathtakingly beautiful celestial dancer in the court of heaven. She becomes completely enamored with Arjuna, visits his mansion in the dead of night, and openly offers herself to him.
And Arjuna, who is a fearless warrior who faces down entire armies, completely panics at the sight of her. He physically shuts his eyes, blocks his ears with his hands, and vehemently refuses her.
He wants nothing to do with it.
Right. Urvashi is deeply confused and offended. She argues essentially, we are in heaven, there is no sin here, there are no earthly rules, and I am burning with desire for you.
Yeah.
But Arjuna explains his refusal. He says that when he looked at her earlier in the royal assembly, he wasn't looking at her with lust. He was looking at her with deep reverence, viewing her as the ancient mother of the Kaurava race.
Because Arjuna refuses her advances by deliberately placing her in the untouchable, highly revered category of mother, Urvashi is furious at the perceived insult.
Hell hath no fury, right?
Exactly. She curses him. She curses him to pass a year of his life unregarded as a dancer, destitute of his manhood, essentially forcing him to live as a eunuch.
Which sounds like a terrible punishment for a warrior. But the text reveals the twist. This curse actually saves Arjuna's life later during his earthly exile, when he uses that exact cursed disguise to hide undetected in a rival kingdom.
The curse was a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. But the moral of the story, and the explicit, non-negotiable instruction the text gives to all men, is to view all women, except their strictly legal wives, as manifestations of the World Mother or Jagadamba.
The text argues that this specific psychological posture, called matrabhava or motherly attitude, is the ultimate impenetrable shield against passion. It is a cognitive reframing tool.
A reframing tool.
Yes. If an evil thought arises when looking at a woman, the practitioner is instructed to forcefully superimpose the divine image of the World Mother over her physical form, thereby instantly killing the lust through a manufactured sense of intense reverence and taboo.
And to prove to the modern reader that this isn't just ancient mythology that only works for legendary heroes, the author provides contemporary, highly anecdotal miracles shared by his own modern followers. These are stories of regular people experiencing instantaneous, seemingly impossible sublimation through the direct intervention of their guru.
The text elevates the guru from a mere teacher to the status of a literal supernatural protector who can manipulate biological reality.
Like altering their brain chemistry.
Exactly. One prominent story involves a 51-year-old man whose wife had recently passed away. Driven by intense lust, he became obsessed with marrying an 18-year-old girl. His family was utterly horrified and tried everything to stop him, but he was entirely consumed by the desire. In desperation, he visits the ashram of the revered saint Sri Lilashaji Bapu.
Paint the scene of this encounter for us. The man walks in, burning with this inappropriate desire. What happens?
The guru takes one look at him, sees right through him, and bluntly says, "At this age, you want to marry with a bag of flesh and bones." The guru then points dramatically to the sky, stating that he will instead marry the man to God.
Okay, dramatic.
Very. The man goes home, and his skeptical family decides to test this supposed intervention. They literally lock him alone in a room with the 18-year-old girl.
Which is a crazy test.
It is, and the man reports a complete biological miracle. He states that his overwhelming sexual craving had completely, permanently vanished. He even touched her, actively trying to arouse his former passion, but the fire was entirely extinguished. A lifetime of biological programming was overwritten by a single glance from the guru.
That is a wild claim of power. And another devotee shares an even more dramatic story about the guru's reach. This man was traveling on business in Bangkok, Thailand, and ended up in a nightclub where women were dancing.
A very dangerous place for a practitioner.
Exactly. He was deeply shaken, feeling his ascetic purity was under imminent attack by the highly sexualized environment. In that terrifying moment of weakness, thousands of miles away from his home and his guru in India, he suddenly goes into a trance right there in the club. He has a vivid physical vision of his guru appearing beside him, pressing a specific nerve on his body, and instantly filling him with a sweet, soothing, divine peace that completely nullified the lustful environment.
The text uses these specific stories to deliver a message of hope to the overwhelmed practitioner. It's basically saying, look, if you are struggling in the chaotic modern world, you do not have to fight the biological battle alone.
You have supernatural backup.
Right. The guru's advanced yogic power, this supernatural transmission of energy known as Shaktipada, can literally reach across the globe, penetrate a Bangkok nightclub, and rewire your nervous system in real time.
But this intense, all-consuming focus on avoiding lust at all costs brings us to a highly controversial philosophical concept within the text that we absolutely must address. It concerns how the text views and discusses women within the very specific context of male asceticism.
Yes. Maintaining our strict impartiality here, we have to look closely at how the author presents and then attempts to contextualize this extreme rhetoric. The text explicitly tackles a controversial, widely known idea held by some sannyasis.
Let's quickly define sannyasi for context, just so everyone is on the same page.
A sannyasi is a renunciate. This is someone who has completely abandoned worldly life, no property, no family, no job, to focus entirely on spiritual liberation. And among some of these extreme ascetics, there is a harsh phrase that woman is the gateway to hell.
Right. And the author knows this is a deeply offensive phrase. They explicitly ask their female readers not to be offended by it. They pointed a massive, glaring paradox in their own ancient scriptures. The exact same texts that brutally censure women in one chapter will praise them to the heavens in another, stating that women must be universally honored as manifestations of the divine cosmic energy, or Sakti.
It's a huge contradiction.
So what does this all mean? How does the text logically justify saying something so inherently misogynistic and harsh, while simultaneously claiming women are literal divine energy?
The author explains that within the rigid framework of male ascetic practice, this extreme negative rhetoric is not theology. It is a deliberate, highly calculated psychological tool.
A tool.
Yes. It is absolutely not presented as an objective statement on the intrinsic value, the morality, or the soul of women.
Hmm.
Rather, it is an engineered mental weapon designed to manufacture a profound sense of disgust and dispassion, a state called vairagya in the vulnerable mind of the male practitioner.
It's an aggressive cognitive defense mechanism against human biology. The text acknowledges that lust is an incredibly potent, deeply ingrained force that is almost impossible to get rid of naturally. So the scriptures use this harsh, shocking language to deliberately and violently wean men from their natural biological tendencies.
And interestingly, the text even suggests that female practitioners can and should use the exact same psychological technique in reverse, visualizing the gross, fleshy, decaying component parts of a male body to create intense disgust and protect their own ascetic vows.
To illustrate exactly how dangerous even a subconscious, fleeting thought of a woman can be to a male ascetic's precarious spiritual balance, the text shares a rather bizarre, darkly comedic parable.
Oh, the story of the well dream. I absolutely have to hear you tell this one in full detail.
It's so good. So there is a young sannyasi, a celibate monk, who has renounced the world. He is walking on a dusty road through a village, and he sees a loud, joyful marriage procession. Because he is sequestered and a bit naive, he asks a bystander what is happening. The villagers happily explain that the groom is going to get a bride, and tonight they will sleep in a bed together.
He's probably never even thought about that before.
Right. The monk nods and walks on, but his mind gets stuck on this alien concept. He's exhausted from traveling, so he stops to rest and falls asleep on the raised, flat stone platform of a village water well.
Which is already a dangerous place to nap.
Seriously. And in his sleep, that tiny psychological seed planted by the passing procession takes root and blooms into a hallucination.
Right, he starts dreaming.
Yes, he starts dreaming, and in the dream, he is the groom, and he is sleeping in a large bed with his beautiful new bride. In the dream, the bride nudges him and tells him to move over to make more room. So in his sleep, his physical body actually responds to the dream command, and he scoots over on the stone platform.
Huh.
A few moments later in the dream, she tells him to move over even further. He scoots again. And because his physical body is blindly reflecting the dream, he physically scoots right off the edge of the stone platform and plummets straight down into the deep, dark water of the actual well.
Oh my God.
The villagers hear the massive splash, run over in a panic, drop a rope, and manage to pull the sputtering, freezing monk up to safety. When they ask him how on earth he managed to fall into a well while sleeping, he realizes with horror how the mere subconscious thought of a woman almost literally killed him.
Wow.
The young monk concludes his ordeal with this incredible, defining line. He says, "If the momentary company of a mere dream girl could throw me into the well, God knows where the groom's real wife will throw him." It's told as a funny anecdote, but it perfectly encapsulates the absolute terror the text associates with losing mental focus for even a second.
The overarching, inescapable lesson of the text is constant, unwavering vigilance. It is the belief that absolute physical control over the body's subtle energies is the non-negotiable prerequisite for spiritual liberation.
Which brings us to the end of this truly incredible reality-bending journey. We started by looking at the painstaking biology of Ayurvedic digestion, the 30 days and 32 kilos of raw food it takes to manifest a single drop of vital creative energy.
We saw how the text utterly rejects and vilifies Western psychology, explicitly blaming Freud's theories of free sex and suppression for the catastrophic downfall of modern society.
We examined the granular, almost dizzying mechanics of physical purity, actively monitoring the breath in your left and right nostrils before daring to drink water, eating specific unheated herbs, and practicing ancient deity-designed yogic postures to manually override the nervous system's pneumatic pressure.
We looked at how gurus are presented not as teachers, but as supernatural protectors, capable of altering a follower's biochemistry and extinguishing lust from thousands of miles away. And we carefully unpack the controversial, harsh psychological tools the text uses to cultivate extreme dispassion and protect the ascetic from the gateway to hell.
And we bring this all back to you, the listener. Whether you are a scholar of global philosophies, someone deeply curious about the historical and physical roots of Eastern asceticism, or simply someone trying to understand a worldview that is radically, fundamentally different from your own, this text provides a stark, undeniable contrast to our modern reality.
It really does.
We live in a society whose fundamental, inescapable message is constant consumption and instant gratification. Buy this, eat this, watch this, feel good right now. This text, regardless of whether you accept its premise, challenges us to stop and think deeply about where our energy actually goes. It asks us a haunting question. Are we the foolish gardener spending our lives cultivating a rare perfume only to pour it thoughtlessly into the sewer?
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought. It is drawn directly from the text, but it is a point we haven't explored until right this very second.
Oh, I'm ready.
For this entire deep dive, for the last hour or so, we have discussed the meticulous physical preservation of biological energy. We talked about strict diets, freezing cold baths, nostril breathing, and the absolute terrifying avoidance of physical lust.
We've been detailing the purely physical mechanics of eternal youth.
Yes. But buried near the very end of the document is a single, striking, almost contradictory sentence. After all these physical rules, the author casually mentions that peace attained through spiritual practice for the duration of 1 month is put to naught by a single fit of anger.
Wait, what? A single fit of anger.
The text compares a moment of anger to a spark of fire burning down a massive house, stating that it destroys the entire accumulated treasure of your virtues instantly. So we must ask the logical question. If a practitioner spends an entire month flawlessly monitoring their nostrils, eating perfectly bland food, sleeping perfectly on their left side, and avoiding every single impure sexual thought, but then they lose their temper at a passing cart for one single moment, the text claims the entire month of biological and spiritual progress is instantly burned to ashes.
That is wild. It completely upends everything we just talked about.
It forces us to ask, is the true secret of eternal youth actually about physical control at all? Or is it ultimately entirely emotional? If one tiny spark of anger burns down the entire biological house you spent a grueling month building, perhaps all the cold baths and nostril checking, the physical asceticism are merely the training wheels. Perhaps the real battle, the actual secret to supremacy, is the complete, unyielding mastery of the human heart.
It had a profound thought to mull over. Thank you for joining us as we stepped out of the clean, binary world of modern medicine and waded deep into these ancient, invisible, and demanding waters. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.